The blue-tinged fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting an eerie glow that made the metal corridors of Karagon Detention Facility seem even colder than they were. Aiden Matthews trudged through the dimly lit hallway, his footsteps echoing against the steel walls. 5 years of service as a prison guard in this interplanetary facility had drained him. What had begun as a steady job with good pay had slowly eroded his faith in humanity, or any sentient life form for that matter. The war between human colonies and alien civilizations had been raging for over a decade. This detention center represented the harshest reality of that conflict, a place where prisoners of war were treated as tools, as assets to be exploited, or as threats to be contained. Matthews, Commander's office. Now, the sharp voice of a fellow guard cut through Aiden's thoughts. He nodded silently, changing direction toward the administrative wing. Officer Derek Coven stood by the viewport in his office, hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the barren landscape of Karagon. The planet's reddish-brown surface stretched endlessly under a sky tinted with toxic green clouds. Matthews, Derek acknowledged without turning. You've been here 5 years. Consistent performance record. No incidents. Yes, sir. Aiden responded automatically. We've received a high-value prisoner. Classification Alpha. Derek finally turned, his cold eyes meeting Aiden's. She's considered extremely dangerous. Wounded in capture, but that makes her no less lethal. Aiden felt a chill run down his spine. Alpha classification was rare, reserved for prisoners who posed catastrophic threat levels. Cell block E43, Derek continued. You'll oversee her containment. Minimal contact. Surveillance at all times. She's scheduled for intensive interrogation, then termination once we extract what we need. Termination. The word hung in the air. Not prisoner exchange, not long-term imprisonment. Execution. Is there something you want to say, Matthews? Derek asked, noticing Aiden's hesitation. No, sir. I understand my assignment. 20 minutes later, Aiden stood outside cell E43, preparing for the initial processing of the prisoner. The thick metal door slid open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a small, stark chamber. The blue-green lights cast shadows across the figure huddled in the corner. She was humanoid, but clearly alien, skin a pale shade of turquoise, with faint luminescent patterns visible beneath. Her wrists were bound with electromagnetic restraints that pulsed with blue light. Dark, iridescent blood had dried along a wound on her shoulder. As Aiden approached, her eyes snapped open, startlingly violet, with vertical pupils that contracted in the light. She watched him without moving, calculating, assessing. Prisoner E43, Aiden said, his voice more mechanical than he intended. You will be processed according to. Please, human, she whispered, her voice barely audible, accent strange, but her words clear. Spare me, and I'll serve you forever. Aiden froze. In 5 years, he had heard countless pleas, threats, and bribes from prisoners. But something in her voice, a resigned dignity perhaps, or a desperate honesty, pierced through his practiced indifference. That isn't how things work here, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Then how do they work? She asked, her gaze intent. They will kill me. You know this. Aiden said nothing, continuing the processing procedure with robotic precision. He scanned her biometrics, confirmed her restraints were functioning, and checked her wound, superficial but potentially infected. Medical treatment will be administered tomorrow, he said flatly. Before leaving, he glanced back at her. She sat motionless, watching him, those violet eyes reflecting the cold blue light. For the first time in years, Aiden felt a twinge of something he had thought long buried, compassion. And with it came fear, because compassion was dangerous in a place like this. As the cell doors sealed shut behind him, Aiden realized his hands were trembling slightly. He clenched them into fists and continued down the corridor, trying to ignore the whispered words echoing in his mind. Please, human, spare me, and I'll serve you forever. The night cycle brought little rest for Aiden. His quarters, like everything in the facility, were functional and stark. A bed, a desk, a small bathroom unit. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, seeing those violet eyes, hearing that whispered plea. The next morning, Aiden found himself checking the surveillance feed for Cell 43 more frequently than necessary. The alien woman hadn't touched her ration pack. She remained in the same position, occasionally closing her eyes but never appearing to truly sleep. During his patrol, Aiden paused outside her cell. Through the small observation window, he could see her shifting slightly, one finger tracing patterns on the metal wall beside her. At first, he thought she was simply making idle marks, but then he realized she was carving symbols into the metal. Impossibly, given the hardness of the material and the fact that her restraints should have prevented such movement. Curious and concerned, he entered an override code and stepped inside. "What are you doing?" he demanded. She didn't look up immediately, finishing the symbol she was carving. Only then did she turn those violet eyes toward him. "Recording truth," she said simply. Aiden moved closer, examining the markings. They were a mixture of what appeared to be her native script and crude human language letters. One phrase stood out clearly. "I was ordered to kill you." "What does this mean?" Aiden asked, his hand instinctively moving toward his stun baton. "Exactly what it says," she replied, her voice calm. "That was my mission. To infiltrate this facility. To eliminate key personnel. To die in the process. Yet you're telling me this. Because I chose not to complete my mission." She shifted, her restraints glowing brighter as she moved. "I observed. I learned. I decided." "Decided what?" "That I would not be what they made me to be." For the first time, something like emotion flickered across her face, a fleeting expression of defiance. Aiden should report this immediately. The inscriptions, her confession, the implied threat, all of it should go straight to Officer Derek. Yet something held him back. "You haven't eaten," he said instead. "I do not require your food. You're wounded. It will heal or it won't." Aiden found himself strangely bothered by her indifference to her own condition. "The medical droid will come today. To ensure I survive until interrogation," she stated matter-of-factly. "Until they extract what they need and dispose of me." The truth of her words struck Aiden like a physical blow. That was indeed the protocol. The system he served treated prisoners as resources to be used and discarded. "What's your name?" he asked suddenly, surprising himself. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "Loren," she finally said. "My designation is Loren Kalavari 7. I'm Aiden Matthews. I know who you are, Guard Aiden Matthews. I was given extensive information about all high-value targets." The implied threat should have alarmed him, but instead, Aiden found himself curious. "Why are you telling me all this?" "Because," Loren said, her gaze unwavering, creating a 3-minute blind spot in the secondary corridors. At precisely 0347 hours, he moved. He disabled the 2 guards at the junction point with quick, efficient strikes, enough to incapacitate but not seriously injure. Years of combat training before becoming a prison guard served him well. He dragged them into a supply closet, secured them, and continued towards cell E43. The door required multiple authorization codes, but Aiden had prepared for this, using a security override he'd obtained from the system. The lock disengaged with a soft click that sounded thunderous in the quiet corridor. Loren was standing in the center of her cell, as if expecting him. "You've decided," she stated. "Yes." Aiden worked quickly to deactivate her restraints. "We have less than 15 minutes before the next patrol sweep. You're committing treason against your people," she observed as the electromagnetic cuffs powered down and fell away from her wrists. "I'm choosing not to be a part of murder," he replied, his voice tight. "Can you move?" "You're wound. Is manageable." Loren rolled her shoulder, wincing slightly. "Where will we go?" "There's an old maintenance tunnel system that predates the current facility. It connects to the mine shafts in the western quadrant. If we can reach it without being detected." "They will hunt us," Loren said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Their eyes met in the dim blue light of the cell. An understanding passed between them. They were now bound together, 2 fugitives against a system designed to capture and control. "Then we should move quickly," Loren said, stepping toward the door. The journey through the facility's lower levels was a tense exercise in timing and stealth. Twice they had to flatten themselves against walls as patrol drones hummed past. Once, they waited in breathless silence as a night shift guard passed just meters away, yawning as he completed his rounds. The entrance to the old maintenance tunnels was hidden behind an obsolete waste processing unit. Aiden heaved aside the heavy panel, revealing a dark passage beyond. "It's not used anymore," he explained in a whisper. "Too narrow for the automated systems they use now." They had barely entered the tunnel when the facility's alarm system erupted into life, a wailing siren accompanied by flashing red emergency lights. "They've discovered the guards," Aiden said grimly. "Or check your cell. Come on." The tunnel was claustrophobic, barely wide enough for them to move in single file. The air was stale and thick with dust. Their only light came from the emergency illumination strips that still functioned on the tunnel floor, casting an eerie green glow that reminded Aiden of the toxic clouds above Karagon. After what seemed like hours of navigating the labyrinthine passages, they emerged into a larger chamber, an abandoned mining control room. Equipment lay covered in dust, control panels dark and dead. "We should rest," Aiden said, checking the old door mechanisms to ensure they were secure. "The tunnel exit is still several kilometers ahead. It leads to the surface near the old mining quarry." Loren moved to the viewport, gazing out at the darkness beyond. The facility was visible in the distance, its searchlights sweeping across the barren landscape, drones already dispatched and searching in expanding patterns. "They will send tracking units," she said, her voice level. "Designed for the environment." "I know." Aiden slumped against the console, the reality of what he had done finally hitting him. He was now a fugitive, a traitor to the military he had served for years. There would be no going back. "You regret your choice?" Loren asked, watching him closely. "No," Aiden said, surprising himself with how true it felt. I don't know what comes next." "Survival," Loren replied simply. She moved around the room, examining their surroundings with methodical precision. In one corner, she found an emergency kit, preserved in a sealed container. Inside were basic medical supplies, emergency rations, and a small portable heater. They sat in the dim green light, sharing a ration bar. The heater cast a warm orange glow between them, a stark contrast to the cold blue lights of the prison. For the first time, Aiden could see Loren clearly, the delicate patterns beneath her skin, the way her violet eyes reflected the flame-like light. "Why did you help me?" she asked suddenly. "The truth." I didn't consider the question. "Because I couldn't be part of it anymore. The system, the dehumanization, watching people, beings, treated like objects to be used and disposed of. Even though I told you I was sent to kill you." "Yes." He met her gaze. "You said you chose not to, that you decided. That matters to me, the ability to choose a different path than what's expected or ordered." Ren was silent for a long moment. "My kind are engineered," she finally said, "created for specific purposes. Loyalty and obedience are built into our design. Yet something failed in me." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I was sent to study, infiltrate, and eliminate. But as I watched you, day after day, I recognized something." "What?" "That you were as much a prisoner as those you guarded." She gestured to the space around them. Different walls, same cage. The insight struck Aiden deeply. He had never articulated it, even to himself, but she was right. The regimented life, the unquestioning obedience, the gradual numbing of empathy. He had been imprisoned by the system he served. "When I first saw you," Loren continued, "I sensed your discontent, your conflict. It interested me, made me question my mission. So you let yourself be captured?" "I engineered it. I needed to understand more, to see if my instincts about you were correct. And your plea? Spare me, and I'll serve you forever." Loren's expression shifted, becoming more complex. A test, to see if you would exert power or show compassion. Many would have taken the offer literally, claimed ownership, demanded subservience. "But you were never planning to serve anyone." "No." She looked into the heater's glow. "I was seeking an ally, someone who might also want escape." They fell into silence then, the implications of her revelation settling between them. Aiden felt strangely seen, understood in a way he hadn't experienced in years. The emotional walls he had built to survive in the detention facility seemed to crumble in her presence. Outside, the searchlights continued to sweep across the landscape. The hunt had begun. They rested for 3 hours before continuing their journey through the maintenance tunnels. The passage gradually inclined upward, the air becoming less stale, hinting at the surface above. Aiden's security clearance had provided him with old facility maps, but many sections had been altered over the years, requiring them to backtrack several times. The exit should be just ahead, Aiden whispered as they approached a heavy metal hatch. But we'll be exposed once we're on the surface. The drones have thermal imaging, motion sensors. How far to potential transport? Loren asked, examining the hatch mechanism. There's an old mining outpost about 20 kilometers east, occasionally used by smugglers and transport crews looking to avoid official channels. If we can reach it, there might be a ship. 20 kilometers across open terrain. Loren's expression remained neutral, but Aiden could sense her calculating the odds. The atmospheric conditions? Toxic without filtration. I have 2 emergency masks in my pack. Limited duration, 8 hours at most. Loren nodded. Then we move fast and hope. Together, they pushed open the heavy hatch. Cold air rushed in, carrying the acrid scent of Karagon's atmosphere. They emerged onto the surface, immediately crouching behind a rock formation. The sky above was a swirl of toxic green clouds, the landscape barren and rocky, broken only by abandoned mining equipment. The detention facility loomed in the distance, searchlights still sweeping methodically. Drones buzzed on the horizon, their patterns becoming more erratic as they expanded the search grid. We need to move while we're still in the sensor shadow of the rock formations, Aiden said, securing his breathing mask. He offered the second to Loren, who hesitated briefly before accepting it. Your technology is not designed for my physiology, she noted. It will be less effective. Will it keep you alive? For a time, they set out across the barren landscape, keeping low and using the natural terrain for cover wherever possible. The weak sunlight filtering through the toxic clouds cast everything in a sickly green hue. The horizon seemed to waver, distorted by heat and chemical reactions in the atmosphere. After 2 hours of careful progress, disaster struck. A patrol drone appeared suddenly over a ridge, its sensors immediately locking onto their heat signatures. It emitted a high-pitched signal, alerting the facility to their location, before launching a immobilizing net toward them. Run! Aiden shouted, shoving Loren toward a nearby ravine. The net missed, striking the ground where they had stood moments before. They sprinted across the uneven terrain, the drone in pursuit, now firing stun projectiles that kicked up dust where they struck the ground. More drones were converging, responding to the alert. We won't outrun them, Loren called, her breathing labored through the ill-fitting mask. She stopped abruptly, turning to face the approaching drones. Continue east. I will divert them. No, Aiden grabbed her arm. They'll capture you. They will capture us both if we stay together. Her violet eyes were resolute behind the mask. I can lead them north, away from the outpost. Create confusion in their tracking systems. I'm not leaving you. You must. Her hand gripped his with surprising strength. This is my choice, Aiden. Matthews. Do not take it from me. In that moment, Aiden understood something fundamental about Loren. For a being created and conditioned for obedience, the ability to choose, even to choose sacrifice, was precious beyond measure. Find a way to the outpost, she continued. I will attempt to reunite with you there. Before he could protest further, she darted away, moving with startling speed across the open ground, deliberately exposing herself to the drone sensors. The machines immediately adjusted course, following her retreating figure. Aiden hesitated only a moment before continuing east, using the distraction to make significant progress toward the outpost. As he ran, he glanced back to see Loren disappearing over a ridge, a swarm of drones in pursuit. His chest tight with both exertion and emotion, Aiden pushed forward. She had given him a chance. He wouldn't waste it. The detention facility's central interrogation chamber was a room designed to intimidate. Stark white walls, blinding overhead lights, and a single metal chair bolted to the floor at its center. Restraints built into the chair hummed with electromagnetic energy. Loren sat perfectly still, her wrists and ankles secured to the cold metal. The wound on her shoulder had reopened during her capture, dark iridescent blood slowly seeping through her prison garment. Her breathing mask had been removed, exposing her to the facility's atmosphere, breathable for her species, but less comfortable than her natural environment. Officer Derek circled the chair slowly, studying her with clinical detachment. "Interesting," he said, his voice echoing in the barren room. "Your behavioral patterns deviate significantly from our intelligence on your species." Loren remained silent, her violet eyes following his movement. "Your kind are engineered for absolute loyalty," Derek continued. "Yet you aided a human traitor. You disobeyed your directive to eliminate him." He leaned closer. "Why? I made a choice," Loren replied simply. Derek's expression hardened. "Your kind aren't designed for choices. You follow programming, conditioning. So I want to understand the malfunction." He moved to a control panel on the wall, adjusting settings. The restraints on Loren's chair pulsed with increased energy, sending visible discomfort through her body. She tensed but made no sound. "Where is Matthews heading?" Derek demanded. Loren's expression remained impassive. "I don't know." Another adjustment to the controls. This time, Loren couldn't suppress a sharp intake of breath as pain coursed through her nervous system. "You were observed traveling together before you separated," Derek pressed. "He shared his escape plan with you." "No plan survives implementation," Loren responded, her voice strained but steady, "especially when pursuit is involved." Derek's patience visibly thinned. He activated a more intensive interrogation protocol, one that sent Loren's body arching against the restraints. Still, she remained silent, her jaw clenched against the pain. When the cycle ended, Derek leaned in close. "You were ordered to kill him. Why didn't you?" Through labored breathing, Loren met his gaze directly. "Because I learned there are choices beyond orders. And now you'll die for that misconception," Derek snapped. "After we extract every bit of useful intelligence from your mind." "I've already chosen," Loren whispered, a strange calm settling over her features despite the pain. "You cannot take that from me." Miles away, Aiden had reached the outer perimeter of the abandoned mining outpost. The collection of dilapidated structures stood silent under the toxic sky, showing no immediate signs of life or activity. He approached cautiously, alert for any security systems or inhabitants. The main building, once an administrative center, seemed the most likely place to find communications equipment or information about transport. Aiden forced open a rusted side door and slipped inside, his breathing mask filtering the worst of the dust that billowed up. The interior was a mess of collapsed ceiling panels, overturned furniture, and abandoned equipment. Signs of hasty evacuation were everywhere. Personal items left behind, dried food still in containers. The mining operation had clearly ended abruptly and without proper decommissioning. Aiden made his way to what appeared to be a communication center. Most of the equipment was dead, power long since cut off. But some emergency systems showed faint indicator lights, suggesting backup power might still be functional. After an hour of careful work, Aiden managed to activate an ancient terminal. The screen flickered to life, displaying a transport schedule that hadn't been updated in years. However, one entry caught his attention, a regular smuggler's route that, according to the notations, still made monthly stops at the outpost for mineral collection. The next scheduled arrival was only 2 days away. Hope flickered in Aiden's chest. If he could survive here for 2 days, there might be a way off this planet. But the thought was immediately followed by concern for Loren. Had she been recaptured? Was she still free? Try to find her way to him? Or worse, had she been killed in the pursuit? The sound of a vehicle approaching outside interrupted his thoughts. Aiden quickly shut down the terminal and moved to a position where he could observe without being seen. A military transport had arrived, disgorging a squad of facility guards. Leading them was Officer Derek himself. Aiden's blood ran cold. They had tracked him here, whether through technology or simple deduction. And Derek's presence suggested this was no ordinary pursuit. As the guards spread out to search the outpost, Aiden evaluated his options. The building had multiple exits, but making a run for it across open terrain would be suicide. Fighting was equally futile. He was outnumbered and outgunned. Then he noticed something that changed everything. Being escorted from the transport, her hands bound and her steps faltering, was Loren. Even from a distance, Aiden could see she had been subjected to interrogation. Her posture spoke of pain barely contained, her normally smooth movements now jerky and strained. They were using her as bait, knowing he would be watching. The realization twisted in Aiden's gut like a knife. She had sacrificed herself to give him a chance to escape, and now they were using her to draw him out. What followed was a calculation made in seconds, but felt like hours. Aiden had one advantage: intimate knowledge of facility protocol and Derek's tactical preferences. The commander always kept his most valuable assets close, would always preserve his own safety above all else, and routinely underestimated those he considered inferior. Using the building's maintenance crawl spaces, Aiden circled behind the search party, approaching the transport vehicle where Derek remained with Loren and two guards. He waited until the search teams had penetrated deeper into the outpost structures, then moved. The first guard went down silently, caught in a chokehold that rendered him unconscious in seconds. The second had just enough time to reach for his weapon before Aiden's precise strike incapacitated him. Derek spun around, weapon already drawn, but he hesitated when he saw Aiden standing there, unarmed. "Matthews," he said, a cold smile spreading across his face, "saving me the trouble of hunting you down." "Let her go," Aiden replied, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "Your quarrel is with me." "Quarrel?" Derek laughed harshly. "This isn't personal, Matthews. This is protocol. You've compromised security by releasing a high-value prisoner. The penalty is clear. And yet you brought her here instead of keeping her secure at the facility," Aiden observed, "using her as bait rather than following proper containment procedures. That seems personal to me." Derek's expression hardened. "I wanted to understand what could possibly make a model guard throw away his career, his life, for an alien assassin." He glanced at Loren, who watched the exchange with those unnerving violet eyes. "What did she offer you? What did she promise?" "Nothing," Aiden answered truthfully. "She offered nothing except the truth about what we were doing, what I was participating in." "And what is that exactly?" "Murder. Sanctioned, institutional murder." Derek's laugh was hollow. "She was engineered to kill. That's her purpose. Executing her is no different than decommissioning a weapon." "She chose not to kill," Aiden replied. "She chose differently than her programming. That makes her more than a weapon." "Sentimental nonsense," Derek snapped, his patience visibly wearing thin. "Step back from the transport, Matthews. My men will be returning soon. There's nowhere for you to go." It was in that moment that Loren moved. Despite her restraints, despite the injuries from interrogation, she launched herself at Derek with startling speed. The attack wasn't meant to harm, merely to distract, but it was enough. Derek fired reflexively, the shot going wide as Loren collided with him. Aiden seized the opportunity, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. The struggle was brief but violent. Derek had combat training, but Aiden had desperation and something he hadn't felt in years: righteous anger. They crashed against the transport vehicle, wrestling for control of the weapon. The shot, when it came, was deafening in the quiet outpost. For a heartbeat, both men stood frozen, locked together. Then Derek slumped forward, a look of surprise on his face. The energy round had struck him in the chest, not immediately fatal with prompt medical attention, but certainly incapacitating. Aiden lowered the officer to the ground, then quickly moved to free Loren from her restraints. "Can you move?" he asked urgently, noting how she swayed on her feet. "Yes," she answered, though. Her voice was strained. "The search teams will have heard the shot. They could already hear shouts in the distance as the guards registered the weapon discharge. Without further discussion, they commandeered the transport vehicle. Aiden's security clearance hadn't yet been deactivated in the system, an oversight that allowed him to start the engine and override the automated return protocol. The vehicle roared to life, kicking up dust as they accelerated away from the outpost. Behind them, guards emerged from the buildings, firing ineffectively at the retreating transport. "Where?" Loren asked, bracing herself against the dashboard as the vehicle bounced over the uneven terrain. "East," Aiden replied grimly. "As far as we can get before they organize pursuit. There's a smuggler's ship scheduled to arrive in 2 days. If we can find a place to hide until then." The landscape blurred past them, Karagon's desolate beauty stark and unforgiving. They had become fugitives in truth now. Shooting a commanding officer had escalated their situation beyond any possibility of surrender or negotiation. Only escape remained. As the detention facility disappeared behind the horizon, Aiden felt a strange mixture of terror and liberation. He glanced at Loren, who sat with her eyes closed, controlling her pain through what appeared to be trained breathing techniques. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what they did to you." Loren opened her eyes, those violet orbs finding his. "My pain was my choice," she said simply, "as was helping you." "Why? Why make that choice?" A faint smile touched her lips. "Because in you, I recognized possibility. The potential to be more than what we're told to be." The transport vehicle carried them across the barren landscape until fuel reserves ran critically low. They abandoned it near a cluster of rock formations that would provide some shelter from the elements and concealment from aerial searches. Karagon's harsh environment quickly made itself felt. The temperature dropped dramatically as the weak sun began to set, and the toxic winds grew stronger, forcing them deeper into the natural cave system they had discovered among the rocks. Aiden's breathing mask was beginning to fail, its filtration system clogging with the planet's corrosive atmosphere. Lorenz had been taken during her capture, leaving her exposed to the irritating air. 2 days, Aiden muttered, checking the makeshift barricade they had created at the cave entrance. "If we could just hold out 2 days. They will send everything they have," Loren observed, her voice raspy from the atmosphere's effects. "A commanding officer was shot. The response will be disproportionate." "I know." Aiden slumped against the cave wall. "But Derek will live if they get him medical attention quickly. That might buy us some time while he's out of commission. You could have killed him." "Yes. Why didn't you?" Aiden considered the question. "Because then I'd be what he claimed I was, a traitor, a murderer. I want to be something else." Night fell with an intensity peculiar to Karagon. Absolute darkness broken only by the faint luminescence of certain minerals in the cave walls. The temperature continued to drop, soon reaching dangerous levels. They huddled together for warmth, using the emergency thermal blanket from Aiden's pack. "You're wound," Aiden said, noticing how Ren winced when she moved. "Let me see." In the dim light, he examined the injury to her shoulder. The interrogation had reopened it, and now signs of infection were setting in. Her skin hot around the edges, a faint glow emanating from the wound itself. "Bioluminescent infection response," Loren explained, seeing his concern. "My body is fighting it. Will it be enough?" "Unknown." Her direct gaze was somehow comforting in its honesty. "But I have survived worse." They fell into silence, conserving energy and warmth. Outside, the wind howled, carrying toxic particles that scratched against the rock like countless tiny claws. "If we reach the smuggler's ship," Aiden said after a long while, "where would you go?" "I cannot return to my people," Ren replied. "My failure to complete the mission would mean reconditioning or termination. Then, I do not know. Perhaps there are places where neither humans nor my kind hold influence. Neutral territories. We could find one," Aiden suggested, surprising himself with the implied partnership. Together, Ren studied him in the dim light. "You would continue with me? After reaching safety?" "I have nowhere else to go either," he admitted. "And I think we both know what it means to be alone in hostile territory." A hint of warmth flickered across Loren's features, the closest thing to a genuine smile he had seen from her. Yes, she agreed softly. We do. The next day brought new challenges. Drone activity increased dramatically, their mechanical whirring audible even from within the cave. Military transports could be seen in the distance, systematically searching the terrain. The detention facility had deployed significant resources to find them. Aiden's breathing mask failed completely by midday, its filters clogged beyond use. He began to cough as Karagon's atmosphere irritated his lungs, each breath becoming more difficult than the last. Your physiology cannot tolerate much more exposure, Ren observed, watching his deteriorating condition with concern. I'll manage, Aiden rasped between coughs. Just until tomorrow. The smuggler's ship may not come, Ren finished for him. Or maybe intercepted. It's our only chance. As the day progressed, Aiden's condition worsened. His breathing became more labored, and a feverish flush spread across his skin. The toxic elements in Karagon's atmosphere were beginning to affect his system more seriously. Ren watched him with growing concern. Then, unexpectedly, she moved to sit directly beside him, her cool skin pressing against his feverish body. What are you doing? He asked weakly. My species evolved in toxic environments, she explained. Our respiratory system can filter certain elements. She placed her palm against his chest. Be still. Breathe slowly. Aiden felt a strange sensation, a cooling relief that spread from where her hand touched him. His breathing eased slightly, the burning in his lungs diminishing. How are you? Symbiotic exchange, she interrupted. Temporary, but it will help. Rest now. He drifted into uneasy sleep, aware of Ren's presence beside him, her hand remaining on his chest, somehow filtering the toxins from his system through direct contact. It was an intimacy neither of them had anticipated, a literal sharing of breath and life. When he woke hours later, the sun had set again. Ren sat at the cave entrance, keeping watch. She looked weaker, but her posture remained vigilant. You shouldn't have done that, Aiden said, his voice slightly stronger. It drained you. A calculated risk, she replied without turning. Your survival increases our collective chance of escape. Thank you, he said simply. She acknowledged with a slight nod, continuing her watch. The morning of the third day arrived with an unexpected development. A dust storm began to form on the horizon, massive clouds of toxic particles sweeping across the landscape. The facility's search efforts visibly slowed as the patrols sought shelter from the approaching storm. This could help us, Aiden noted, watching the distant churning clouds. Cover our approach to the landing site. Or kill us before we reach it, Loren countered pragmatically. The density of toxins in that storm would overwhelm even my filtration capabilities. Nevertheless, they began preparations to move. The smuggler's ship, if it adhered to the schedule, would arrive within hours. They had only a narrow window to reach the designated landing area. They fashioned makeshift protection from the thermal blanket, creating crude masks that might offer minimal protection against the worst of the storm. As they prepared to leave their shelter, Loren suddenly gripped Aiden's arm. Listen, she whispered. Above the growing howl of the wind, a distinctive sound could be heard, the deep thrumming of a ship's engines, different from the military transports. Looking up, they caught a glimpse of a battered cargo vessel descending through Karagon's toxic clouds, earlier than expected. The smugglers, Aiden breathed. They've changed their schedule. Perhaps responding to the approaching storm, Loren suggested. We must move now. They abandoned the cave, heading directly toward the landing site, using rock formations for cover where possible. The storm edge was approaching rapidly, the air already thickening with caustic particles that stung Aiden's eyes and throat. The cargo ship touched down roughly in a flat area approximately a kilometer from their position. Its engines remained active, a quick stop, then, not planning to remain long in the deteriorating conditions. They increased their pace, fighting against the strengthening wind. Aiden's lungs burned, each breath a struggle, but the possibility of escape drove him forward. Beside him, Loren moved with determination despite her weakened state. When they were halfway to the ship, disaster struck. A military drone, somehow still operational despite the storm conditions, spotted their movement. It emitted a high-pitched alert signal before the swirling dust obscured it from view. "Run!" Aiden gasped, abandoning any pretense of stealth. They sprinted toward the cargo vessel, now clearly visible through the thickening dust. A battered but functioning ship with its cargo ramp extended as crew hurriedly loaded the last of whatever contraband minerals they had come to collect. Behind them, the unmistakable sound of a military transport approaching cut through the storm's howl. The facility had responded to the drone's alert with remarkable speed. The smugglers, hearing the approaching transport, began hastily retracting their ramp, preparing for immediate departure. "Wait!" Aiden shouted, waving desperately as they closed the distance. "Please!" A figure appeared at the top of the retracting ramp. Humanoid, but clearly not human, with 4 arms and an environmental suit covering most of its features. It hesitated, observing their desperate approach. The military transport was now visible through the dust, its searchlights cutting through the storm. Armed guards were disembarking, taking positions to intercept the fugitives. "They're going to leave," Ren observed, her voice strained with exertion. In that moment, Aiden made a split-second decision. "Keep going," he urged, slowing his pace. "I'll draw their fire." "No," Ren protested sharply. "We both go. There's no time to argue." Aiden pushed her forward toward the ship. "They want me more than you. I shot their commander." Before she could respond, he veered away, drawing his stolen weapon and firing toward the military transport, intentionally missing, but creating enough threat to focus their attention on him rather than Loren. The guards immediately returned fire, energy rounds illuminating the dust-filled air. Aiden dove behind a rock formation, continuing to provide covering fire, watching as Loren sprinted the remaining distance to the cargo ship. The 4-armed smuggler reached out, hauling her aboard as the ramp continued to close. Aiden felt a surge of triumph. She would escape, would have a chance at the freedom she had chosen. He prepared to make one final run toward the ship himself, but searing pain suddenly tore through his leg as an energy round found its mark. He collapsed, the weapon falling from his grasp. Through the swirling dust, he saw the cargo ship's engines flare brighter, preparing for liftoff. "Go," he whispered, though there was no way she could hear him. "Just go." The ship began to rise, its landing gear retracting. The facility guards were approaching his position, weapons trained, shouting commands he couldn't hear over the storm and the roaring engines. Then, incredibly, the cargo ship halted its ascent. The ramp, nearly closed, suddenly extended again, just enough for a figure to leap from it, landing with inhuman grace despite the height. "Ren!" She sprinted toward him through the dust storm, violet eyes ablaze with determination. The guards, momentarily confused by this unexpected development, redirected their attention. "What are you doing?" Aiden gasped as she reached him, pain radiating from his wounded leg. "Making my choice," she replied simply, hauling him to his feet with surprising strength. Supporting his weight, she began moving them toward the ship, which hovered precariously, its engines straining against the intensifying storm. Energy rounds sizzled past them, the guards now in active pursuit. The 4-armed smuggler waited at the ramp, gesturing urgently for them to hurry. Each step was agony for Aiden, but Loren's strength sustained him, her determination infectious. A final burst of speed, a desperate lunge, and then they were on the ramp, the smuggler's multiple limbs helping to drag them aboard as the ship immediately began to ascend. The ramp sealed with a hydraulic hiss, shutting out the howling storm and the increasingly ineffective weapons fire from below. Inside, the cargo hold was dimly lit and cluttered with containers of minerals. The air, though recycled and stale, was blissfully free of Karagon's toxins. "You came back," Aiden said, his voice weak as Loren helped lower him to the metal floor. "Yes," she replied simply. "Why?" "You had your freedom." Loren was silent for a moment, those violet eyes studying him intently. "Freedom alone was not what I chose," she finally said. "I chose this path with you." The smuggler approached, chittering in a language neither of them understood. After a moment, it switched to heavily accented standard language. Dangerous. Facility tracking. Payment required. Aiden had nothing to offer. No currency, no valuables. But Loren reached for her neck, removing a small pendant that had been concealed beneath her prison garments. It glowed with a faint inner light, clearly of significant value. Sufficient, the smuggler decided after examining it, then gestured toward a doorway. Medical bay. Small. Limited. They made their way to the tiny medical compartment, where automated systems helped clean and treat Aiden's wound. The energy round had caused significant damage, but nothing life-threatening with proper care. Through the viewport, they watched as Karagon receded beneath them, its toxic green clouds swirling with the dust storm they had narrowly escaped. The detention facility was no longer visible, just the harshly beautiful, deadly landscape of a planet that had been both prison and the site of their desperate bid for freedom. "Where is this ship headed?" Aiden asked the smuggler when it returned to check. "On them. Neutral trading post. Carva Station. 3 days transit." It regarded them with multifaceted eyes. "Facility bounty soon." "On both." "We understand," Loren answered. "Carva Station is acceptable." When the smuggler left, Aiden turned to Loren, who was examining the medical systems with curious interest. "Your pendant," he said. "It seemed valuable." "A neural pathfinder," she explained. "Given to me when I was first activated. It contains memories, connections." A shadow passed across her features. "It was the last thing connecting me to my origins." "I'm sorry," Aiden said, understanding the magnitude of what she had sacrificed. "Don't be." Her expression cleared. "It was a link to a past I've chosen to leave behind." She looked out at the stars, now visible through the viewport. "What matters is what lies ahead." "And what is that?" Aiden asked softly. "Unknown," Ren admitted, a hint of wonder in her voice. "That is what freedom truly means, isn't it? The future unwritten, determined by our choices rather than our programming or orders." Aiden felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Hope, perhaps, or the first tentative belief that they might actually forge a new path together. The cargo ship accelerated, entering the jump point that would carry them away from the Karagon system. As the stars stretched and blurred around them, Aiden and Loren watched in silence. Two refugees from different worlds, bound by choices that had defied expectation and programming alike. "Whatever comes next," Aiden said, "we face it together." Loren's hand found his, cool fingers intertwining with warm ones. "Yes," she agreed. "Together." The ship hurtled through the jump point, carrying them toward an uncertain future, but one they had chosen freely, together. Behind them lay a cold prison cell where a warrior had once whispered a desperate plea. Ahead lay infinite possibilities, born from the moment they had each decided to be more than what others had made them to be. As Karagon and its detention facility faded into distant memory, what remained was the most powerful force in any galaxy. The freedom to choose one's own path, regardless of programming, conditioning, or expectation. In that freedom, Aiden and Loren had found something neither had expected but both now treasured, a companion for the journey ahead, whatever it might hold.